Do we need to turn this air conditioning off again? Thank you. Great, thank you. My name's Paul Martin. Today is August 3rd. This is the second lecture of the day here at the Freiburg New Church Assembly. We've been talking about community all week, and of course I mentioned lots of different kinds of communities in my last lecture. There's, obviously business communities, recreation, friendship. There's all kinds of purposes to communities. But today we'll focus on spiritual communities like this one. And so the question is, how does a community encourage spiritual growth or regeneration? I called this talk Community and Regeneration because regeneration happens in community. And at least for spiritual communities, that's the point or purpose of the community. As I say, there's different purposes for different kinds of communities. I'm going to share what I feel like I've learned from a lifetime of seeking, and there's only like one or two things, but I'm going to tell you what they are. From a teenager, I've been involved in studying psychology and religion. I've had many sources, so I'm not going to cite the sources as I go through my talk, but as I say, I've been interested in psychology and religion, which isn't surprising. My parents were. My mother was a psychologist. My father was a minister. I got interested went to teen camps here. My first church camp was here at Freiburg. It was called LEI when I was 16 years old. I then went to psychology school, California School of Professional Psychology in San Francisco to study psychology. Then I went to the Swedenborg School of Religion. My teachers studying the Bible with George Dole, studying Swedenborg with George and Bill Woofenden and Bob Curvin. Cal Turley was combining psychology and religion, which was what I was trying to do. He called it theotherapy, God-centered therapy. After school, I studied with some mystics like David Spangler. I studied a lot of Buddhism. And so I'm not claiming I thought of these ideas. They came to me from all this lifetime of study. And the thing that I was most struck by, that I studied all these different spiritual paths, these different kinds of psychology, and they all were about getting past the ego. They all talk about that. You're like, how do we get past the ego? And they all say that's the goal, but not many of them have really very sure ways of doing it. And not that it's an easy thing to do, but I think Swedenborg has two keys that are so important and almost foolproof for doing this. So those are the two things I'm going to share today. How to get past the ego. Kent, in his talk about healers, mentioned humility and gratitude. Well, emptying ourselves of egocentricity. So same thing. How do you get past the ego? I have a dear friend I've just made in the last year or so who's a Gestalt therapist, and they call it, her branch of Gestalt therapy, relational Gestalt, because it's studying how everything happens in context. We're social beings. That Gestalt therapy is saying we develop our neuroses or our problems in a relationship. We're not just individuals having our own little psychological problems. We developed these in a context of relationships. And shame is one of the biggest things. And shame keeps us in the ego. And we're really taught shame. We learn it. Allison talked about the Garden of Eden. Here it is, Garden of Eden. It's kind of one of our first childhood experiences. and we feel like, oh, we did something wrong, we were bad, original sin, and all of that. And what's the immediate reaction? Shame. They were ashamed. And being naked, they suddenly realized they were naked. It's like naked, and it can be purity and all that, but it's also being seen. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be seen for who I am. I'm ashamed of who I am, so I don't want to be seen, and they go and hide. And so shame is just a huge thing. We learn it from our parents from an early age. We're taught that our feelings aren't okay, that, why can't you control yourself, control your feelings, control your emotions, control your energy, sit still. We're taught it by our friends who make fun of us if we make a mistake. They laugh at us or whatever. Our teachers teach us we're not good enough. We can't get straight A's, what's wrong with you? Why can't you get an A? Why can't you be perfect? Our employers, when we get jobs, again, they're telling us what we're doing wrong. We're never good enough. Society, all the advertising, our clothes aren't good enough, our cars aren't good enough, we don't look good enough, we're just not good enough. And how can we be good enough? We can't really, And of course, luckily, Jesus says we don't have to be good enough. Everybody's good enough. We're all forgiven. All of our sins are forgiven. We don't have to earn salvation. We don't have to earn love. But if we really believed that would be great. But how do we really believe that? We still don't feel good enough. And of course, we can always get better. So, one way of looking at it is we're all trying to improve. But it's not really important to assess. Like if spirituality is a journey, to assess, well, how many people am I ahead of, and how many people are ahead of me, and where do I stand in this, in this race for spiritual growth? Does it really matter, what percent of the population is ahead of me and what's behind me? But yet we're always comparing ourselves to others. So they call it relational gestalt because we learn in context, and we learn shame. And then it's also saying we learn to take care of ourselves. Like what we do isn't bad or wrong. It's like here we are, children, trying to learn to protect our feelings and to not be hurt. So we learn to maybe hide ourselves and do things where we won't risk being hurt. I learned I'm kind of an introvert, so I used that as an excuse where it's easier for me to stay home, and maybe I risk isolation or loneliness, but at least I'm not in a group making a fool of myself, risking failure, So even when I'm in a group, I'll tend to sit in a corner and keep my mouth shut. Mark Twain said, it's better to keep your mouth shut and appear stupid than to open it and remove any doubt. Well, that's kind of how it is. So I'd be quiet, avoid embarrassment and shame, and that way I don't have to worry about making a fool of myself and being ashamed, because shame is a terrible thing. So getting back to the ego, see, obviously shame brings you back into the ego. If you're immediately thinking about yourself and how can I avoid hurt or embarrassment, or if something happens where I am ashamed, now I'm just thinking about myself. Oh no, I'm not good enough. What are they thinking about me? That's all about the ego. And the shame can be so strong that you avoid even being helpful. I remember one of the first times I was with my wife's family, they were making dinner and all that, and I kind of wanted to do the dishes, but I was afraid I wouldn't do it right. Do they like to fill both sinks, or one sink with soapy water and one with clean, and rinse it, or how do they do it? And and then what do you do with the dishes when you've washed them? And so I just kind of sat in a corner and stayed out of it. And then later Sandy, my wife, said, well, they kind of thought, you weren't very helpful. Why didn't you do something to help? And it was like, well, I wanted to help, but I was embarrassed. I thought I'd even do the dishes wrong. You look at the board out here, sign up for doing with the meals and setting the table, and my immediate thought would be, well, I'm not sure how to do the setup, and what if I don't do it right? I don't serve the food right, or I don't clean up right, or, it's easier just not to sign up, and then at least I'm not doing it wrong. And it's easy to fall into shame even when you're not thinking about it. Like, I don't know, if I was walking up here feeling good about my lecture and I tripped on the step, I'd be so embarrassed. Oh, I look like a fool, I'm doing it wrong. Or if I stumble on my words, I'm doing it badly. I'm not doing it right. I'm embarrassed. I'm not a good lecturer. It's easier just to not do the lecture than to risk standing up here and making a fool of myself. And now when we get back to ego, which, as I say, shame pulls you into it, we tend to think of ego as someone has a big ego. Like somehow they think too much of themselves. They think they're so great, and so we say we shouldn't get trapped in that. We shouldn't think we're so great. But thinking we're bad is the same thing. That's still being caught in the ego. You're just thinking, oh, I'm not good enough. Other people are better than me, And so that's really the very same thing. Ego is ego. Ego is thinking about yourself, being more concerned about yourself than other people. And if they talk about two people arguing, no, I'm the greatest sinner. No, I'm the greatest sinner. It's like, well, you think you're bad, you're still preoccupied with yourself and your standing in relationship to other people. So the first key, I'm going to give you these two keys of how to get over ego. Swedenborg, this came up earlier in the session, but I'm going to read it again. Came up earlier in the week from Heaven and Hell 302. I have talked with angels about heaven's bond with the human race, noting that while a churchman might say that everything good is from the Lord and that angels are with men, few of them believe that angels are intimately connected to people, and fewer still that they are within their thoughts and affections. The angels have replied that they knew this faith and profession existed in the world, especially within the church, which surprised them, since within the church is the Word, which teaches people about heaven and its bond with people. Yet such a bond exists that a person cannot have the least thought without spirits present, and his spiritual life depends on this bond. They have stated that the reason for the ignorance of this fact was people's belief that they live on their own, apart from any connection with life, and this lack of awareness that their connection exists through the heavens. Yet if this connection were disengaged, a person would instantly drop dead. If people only believed the way things really are, that everything good is from the Lord and everything evil from hell, then they would not make anything good in themselves a matter of merit, nor would anything evil be charged to them. For in that case, they would focus on the Lord in everything good, and they thought and did, and everything evil that flowed in, they would throw back into hell from where it came. But since people do not believe in any inflow from heaven or from hell, and since then, in their judgment, everything they think and wish is within them, and therefore from them, they make the evil their own, and defile with a sense of merit the good that flows in. It's a great quote, and of course, people have pointed out Swedenborg said this basically same thing a number of times in different ways, but he came back to that quite often. And if we really believed it, that would get rid of the ego problem. if we really believed that, but it's so hard to believe. If we really thought the good and evil is not from us, then we wouldn't take credit for the good. We wouldn't say, oh, what a great person I am, and we wouldn't take credit for the evil, the mistakes either. We'd say, well, those came from the hells or from bad spirits, and I'll just put those aside. But it's so hard to not believe. When I was first ordained in 1982, my first sermon as a new minister was in Los Angeles. And after the sermon, I came down, and Andrei Diakonov was probably in his 80s back then, and in 1982. But he came up to me, and I thought, here's this great old Swedenborg minister. And he said to me, I really liked your sermon. And I said, oh, thank you. Felt good about myself. Thank you. And he said, I didn't mean it as a compliment. I assumed he'd meant it as a compliment. He's building me up or something and talking to my ego. And he didn't explain what he meant, but I thought about that many times over the last 40-some years. But no, he really didn't mean it as a compliment. He didn't mean it as something criticism either, but he probably wanted to engage in something I'd been talking about. He was saying he liked what I had to say. Maybe that was an opening for, okay, let's talk about the ideas. But I'm caught in my ego thinking, did people like my sermon or not? And so I just took it as a compliment. Oh, thank you, I didn't mean it as a compliment. I thought that was so great. I never forgot that. I thought, yes, you're right. It's, because to the extent that I'm failing or if I'm thinking of doing a lecture, if I'm caught up with, I want to impress you, I want to speak well, I want to have some ideas that you'll think are brilliant or whatever, that's just, all of that actually gets in the way of me doing my job. Here I am thinking about me. What can I do that'll impress you? Or how I want to do a good job. I don't want to do a bad lecture. I want to do a good lecture. But all of that gets in the way of me actually doing my job. My job is to at least come up with some idea, spark an idea in your mind, or spark some feeling in you that gives you some more sense of your own understanding and compassion. That's what I should be thinking about, not about, can I do a good job here? And just as we learn, maybe our neuroses or whatever in relationship, in community, it's also a place where we can practice the opposite, where we can practice understanding, love, use. And so a spiritual community, we can think, how do we do that? We try not to judge others. We try to be tolerant and forgiving, understanding, compassionate, useful, honest, as Sage said. And if we do that with each other, then, the hope is, of course, that maybe if you accept me, I'll learn to accept myself. Maybe if I accept you, you'll learn to accept yourself. We stop judging others, and then we can stop judging ourselves, or vice versa. They go together. There's a story of the boy who said he didn't need to go to church. He's just a little kid, but he says, I don't need to go to church anymore. And they said, why don't you need to go to church? Well, I already know I should be better than I am. That's like, sometimes it feels like religion is saying, be a better person. But then they don't tell you how to do it, so we all just go around thinking, yeah, I should be a better person, The second key I believe, for this trying to get over our ego is Swedenborg's idea of love, wisdom, and use. We talk about it all the time. As Swedenborgians, we love it. We throw those words around. We say, well, other people don't know what God is. We know what God is. God is love and wisdom. Great. Well, if we only knew what love and wisdom were. They're just words in a way, but they are so powerful. It's not powerful to think about them, to analyze them, to talk about them. But when you think about love, wisdom, or understanding and use, if you're really loving another person, you're being compassionate, well, you're thinking about them. You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the other person. And then understanding, you're really listening to them. You're not thinking, well, what am I going to say? I'm going to come up with a brilliant thought or question or whatever. You're focused on the other person, trying to understand who they are, what they are, why they think the way they do. And then use, you're saying, okay, what can I do to help around here? Again, so these are the three things that get us out of our ego. They're the three things that get us to stop thinking about ourselves, obsessing about what I think, what I feel, what I want. If I'm really being compassionate, I'm really trying to understand, I'm really trying to be useful, then it's impossible to be thinking about myself and my own ego. Whether I think I'm good or bad is irrelevant, but it's getting it out. It's kind of a paradox that we transform ourselves by not paying attention to ourselves. We pay attention to the other. We pay attention to other people, to the community. How can we make this a better community? How can I help you, listen to you, understand you? So spiritual growth is being loving and understanding, being useful. That's how we grow spiritually. And we practice that in community. We can't be understanding and compassionate and useful on our own, sitting at home, we do that in community because they're all relational things. Relation Gestalt says, everything is in relation. And I think Swedenborg says the same thing. We don't exist apart from our relationships. We are our love. We are our understanding. It comes from God, but we're the ones that let it in or don't let it in or filter it through our own egos and fears and hopes and all of that. But we're spiritual beings, and we practice that in community. So a spiritual community is a place to practice that. And that gets us, again, out of our self. And then we can't stay out of it. Like I said, if I stumble walking up here, it puts me right back in myself, my own ego again. Oh no, what are they thinking of me? I just made a fool of myself. I lost my train of thought. I'm all back in myself again. So it's not you just stay in this love and understanding state of mind. We're always ashamed in a way. We do things, we're embarrassed, and then we start thinking about ourselves again. And then how do we get out of that? We you can't avoid getting back into it. Like I say, if I trip, I'm in it. I'm into my own mind again. Or Stephen Levine said he'd sit in his room and meditate and get into such a beautiful, blissful state of consciousness. Then he'd step out the door and step on his kid's skate. He said, I'm back in the world before I even hit the floor. It's like you're just called right back into it. So it's really unavoidable falling back into it. But the point is not to get stuck in it. Ram Dass, who also worked with Stephen Levine, he got into the idea of service. And he said it didn't get rid of his neuroses. He said, I'm still neurotic, but when these ideas come back to me, I say, I don't have time to think about that now. I don't have time to dwell on my problems or on myself. I'm busy trying to do something here. So it's not that you can avoid these thoughts of self or neurotic thoughts or ego or whatever, but you can say, I don't have time for that now. I don't have time to think about I can think about myself later, I'm busy. I'm trying to be useful here. I'm trying to be understanding. I'm trying to be compassionate. I don't have time for this. So He says, it's not like he's over it. You know, you don't get over it, but you stop dwelling on it. You stop saying, okay, I stumbled, so what? Now I got to get back to what I'm doing here and stop feeling bad about myself. So we can practice these things in relationship to each other by not judging each other, by accepting each other, by forgiving each other, by trying to understand and be compassionate with each other. And this makes us feel safe, maybe, where we can stop worrying so much about our own egos. If I'm not so worried about you judging me or not liking me or whatever, then I can stop worrying about it and stop saying, oh my God, I gotta take care of my feelings here or you guys are gonna hurt me. So that it gives us the safety to be ourselves and really to stop thinking about ourselves. So we can practice this listening, we can practice understanding each other, we can practice supporting and loving each other, finding ways of being useful to each other. We can practice, which is love, wisdom, and use. We can practice this in this community together. And as we do, we grow together, we regenerate together, we become a spiritual community. And then we live together in the Garden of Eden, in the kingdom of God, in heaven on earth. And that's what our goal, I believe, of this any spiritual community is. Okay, I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments.
Thank you. The demon of being an introvert, huh? I'm no introvert, I'm an extrovert. But it's so interesting to hear that side of the story because I used to wonder about that with introverts. What's going on there? So thank you, that's very helpful.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not all about introvert, of course. Some people say, well, you get your energy from introvert. For me, it's more of an excuse to say, oh, I'm an introvert. I don't want to be around people because it's too risky to be around people. I risk shame and guilt and hurt and rejection and everything else that I'd rather avoid. Yes?
So two things. The first is in New Jerusalem and Heavenly Doctrines, the concept where Swedenborg illuminates on proprium. He follows it with a chapter that says, love of the neighbor is the answer. Mm-hmm. And it's a really wonderful, it's around 82 to 95 for anyone who likes numbers. But the other thing is at Almont this year we did the book of Revelation, and I was charged with looking at the descent of the New Jerusalem. And what really stuck out to me at one point is when Swedenborg said, the New Jerusalem is the good of love, period. So for anyone who gets lost in Swedenborgianese, the good of love is actually about seeking the good of the neighbor in action. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the funny thing is, the steps that you're elucidating of how to grow is actually what heaven is. Mm-hmm. And it reminds to me of Swedenborg's statement, those who accept heaven into themselves are the ones who get to heaven. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the ingredient to become heavenly is actually what heaven is. And it's a no-brainer when you think about it, and yet we all seem to fight it. Mm-hmm.
I know. I mean, like I said, we talk about love, wisdom, and use, and we make them sound so big and complicated, like you have to be really good at it. Well, you don't really have to be good at it. You just have to try it. You know, if you're trying to understand someone else, that's getting you out of your ego. It doesn't mean, oh, I have to be really great. I need to understand you perfectly. I need to love you perfectly. No, I just need to focus on you instead of focusing on myself. Yes?
Yes, this is Evan. Thank you, Paul. That was interesting and thought-provoking. My question is, there must be some, though there must be some balancing between overly criticizing yourself, feeling you're in yourself in a critical way, and taking responsibility rather than running from it, perhaps because you're already not a good person or something else you're thinking in your own head. But in today's society, it seems like there's a knee-jerk reaction to shirk self-responsibility with no criticism intended,
Mhm.
your wonderful excuse that you've just painted.
Mhm.
Could you illuminate how we could think about not overreacting the other way either?
Mhm. Well, I mean, Swedenborg talked about the various loves, love of God, love of the neighbor, love of the world, love of self. And sometimes people take that wrong, saying, well, love of self is somehow bad. Well, it's not. You do have to think about yourself. It's not like you can never think about yourself. You have to think about taking care of yourself, what your needs are, but it's keeping them in this priority where I need to take care of myself so I can actually be useful. I'm not going to be very useful if I don't take care of myself. So there's that thinking about yourself in order to be more useful in the world. It's not, don't think about yourself or whatever. And the ego kind of is a paradox, because as a child, psychologists will try to say, well, you got to build up the ego, because you got to be confident enough to go out and function in the world, and without some sense of ego, or Swedenborg would say it's not really yourself, but you're acting as if it was yourself. So you have to feel confident enough to do that, and yet then you have to learn that isn't coming from myself. So then it's like build up the ego just to take it away, So you do have to have some sense of, oh, I can do it, like, in order to do your job and to function in the world, or to think you're worthy of being in relationship with another person. So you do have to have that sense of worth, but you just have to know it's not coming from yourself. It's not, it's coming from God or so forth. So, but you still need to know it's there or feel confident enough in it. Yes?
I'm supposed to say Kevin. I didn't say Kevin last time. And another way I like to put it, I'm a big Habitat for Humanity junkie. I can want to give all I want to give, but I still need to follow building codes. I still need to know how to operate the tools. So there's accountability in the relationship of, if I really care for another, am I actually caring about them, or am I just feigning caring about them because my caring for them makes me feel good? I still need to worry about, am I actually doing good? And how do I do the good? So I like to think of it in terms of building codes.
And that's true for like any job you have. You want to do a good job. Or as a minister, I wanted to study and learn how to be a good minister, but it wasn't in order to feel good about myself. But I had to do it. I had to think, well, what would I need to learn to feel a little better about myself, so I'm willing to talk in front of people, or I need to learn about Swedenborg and the Bible so I know what to say. And so I have to do all this studying and thinking and so forth, and wanting to be a good minister. But then the goal is because I want to be helpful. It's not so I can feel good about myself and, oh, I was a good minister, I can die happy now, and to pat myself on the back. That's not what it's about. Yes?
Am I next? You're next. Oh, okay. I don't want to let my ego get in front of me going in front of other people if they're first. Dave Keating, from talking to other people, I've realized that I'm not the only one that's had trouble forgiving themselves. And it bothers me when I make a mistake. It bothers me more than it should have, and I start castigating myself and perhaps giving the hells a chance to come in, and it keeps going on too long, and I've gotten better at doing it. One thing that's helped, I think myself, well, I believe that God forgives me. Who do I think I am that I can't forgive myself? But that's been a problem for me. I'm still working on it, and it bothers me more than it should. And like you said, if you stumble, you get up and you go on trying to be useful.
I mean, all these things are going to occur to us, like Ram Dass said, you don't dwell on it. Don't just get caught up thinking about it. Of course, we're all going to have self-doubts and self-judgments and all of that, but don't just sit there thinking about yourself all day because you stumbled on something. Yes?
This is Trevor. Back to what you said about being useful and communicating with other people and being empathetic. One of the techniques one of my early counselors taught me that I'm admittedly not very good at is to listen to other people and not be thinking about what you're going to say next. Because if you're thinking about what you're saying next, you're paying attention to yourself and not the other person.
That's exactly true. And if you're so concerned about yourself or worried about sounding smart or not sounding stupid, then it's hard to even listen to someone else, because you're right, you're busy thinking about, well, how should I react to them, and what should I say back to them, and what, you know, you're thinking about yourself, and then you don't even hear what they had to say.
Paul, thank you so much. I'm not even sure exactly why, but I found your talk very moving, and I think it's partly because you've been so honest with us, and I do mean that as a compliment, because you're a representative of God, and thank you for sharing.
Now you're really embarrassing me.
This is Sage. I liked the way a few people have talked about usefulness as a way out of overemphasis on self. I think that was a big part of Helen's life, and I see that in my own life. That as I'm clearer on where I feel called to move, I'm still asking questions about like what will make me most effective. So it's like, well, should I wear a collar? Will people hear me better if I dress this way, or if I do this, if I say it this way? But it's less in regard to will I be enough, and am I gonna, embarrass myself? And I also feel like that transcendence is so important, because if I was as self-involved as I used to be, I would never be able to move, because I think the more committed we are to a direction, the more mistakes are going to happen, because we're going to be putting ourselves out there even more. And so I'm going to stumble 1,000 times. And if I was as concerned about how I was being perceived, it would immobilize me. And I think we all, in some ways, that might be a way to help us learn why it's so useful to stumble and fall and trip and have your hair messy, do all those things, because it's just what life is, and having a direction, it is never going to happen immediately. It's going to require all of these mistakes, and I think, anyway, that's been useful for me. And I think the other piece that did finally start to help shift that for me was like, if I'm sitting in self-condemnation of like, oh, just think of all the other humans around me that are screwing up. I am condemning them as well every time I do that to myself. And so it almost is you can start to transcend self-centeredness by caring for others too, and like, whoa, would I put this same judgment on all of the other humans around the planet, or could I be loving to them? So.
Yeah, I mean, confidence, you have to be confident enough to stand up there, but it's also you have to be trusting enough, or you have to be okay with making a mistake. So you have to be confident of, oh, I can do it, I can give a lecture, whatever, I can play a song, I can whatever. You have to practice and feel like good enough about yourself, I can do it, but you also have to be willing to make a mistake, to realize maybe some people won't like it, or say, or you'll make a mistake and feel bad or whatever. But so it is a combination of the confidence to do it well, but at the same time, the willingness to be shamed or to be embarrassed or to make a mistake. Yes?
This is Susanna. What Sage just shared reminded me, I was talking to my aunt recently, and she's an evangelical. And she goes to a church where she said, well, we have this one lady who she feels it's her job to point out everybody's faults. And so she will go around and tell people, you'll be a better person if you change this or if you change that. And then she laughed and she said, but we all forgive her and we don't mind, because sometimes she's right.
Yeah. One quick thing on that story of Andrei Diakonov saying it wasn't a compliment. Stephen Levine, a Buddhist, said you don't say to a Buddhist, "Don't take it personally." He said there's nobody in there to take it personally. And that's that idea that it's all coming from the spiritual world. Well, how could I take it personally? If it's good, it's from God. If it's bad, it's from the hells or whatever. I mean, you can't take it personally, you know. Yes?
Yeah, I'm next year's my 50th year of teaching, and practicing teaching, which is you practice to get better. But one of the things I've noticed over the years is that the days that I thought I did the worst, 2 weeks later, that information is starting to be the students' information, and they're working on it. Mm-hmm. The days I thought I did a bang-up job, forget it. I got to go do it over again, individually with each student. So I'm kind of trying to think what happened that day. And I think it's, you're always empathetic, but those days I was probably a little more receptive to the fact that they were confused. Which means I still have to try to get some things across today, but I got to try to figure out how to do it, almost individually or within groups. So the day is really long, and there's no inkling that they're getting anything. And so it's when you're doing your worst, you're probably doing something for someone else and you've forgotten yourself. And I've only reached this decision over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. So that's that issue of empathy, but trying to be in someone else's place and then trying to figure out how to say what might be useful for them, but also today we're trying to move the ball up the mountain a little bit, right? So that's something. And the second thing is a terrible thing my dad did when we were growing up. You know, we put in 20 post holes and dig the holes, and when he got all done, he'd find the one that was crooked, and he would say, fair to middling. And so, you know, when you get to be 18, 19, you realize that was high praise, right? And it was probably all right, because it meant the next time you do this, you're probably going to do something, you'll do it a little differently, and there'll probably be something else that didn't work. And so gradually, you get pretty good at something. So it's a kind of real patient thing. So it, unfortunately, in those earlier years, my brothers and sister, we can't retire now. We're having a hell of a time because we're always out in the public, we're always working, we're always making things, and it's getting hard to do that. And how do we continue to do that? So the all three of us are kind of at this point that fair to middling didn't do a very good thing for us. But the fact of what it really meant is something that's been very useful to us. So those are two thoughts about praise, but also when you're thinking you're doing well, you know, it's probably your ego that's doing well, and when you think you're doing poorly, you're probably doing a bang-up job.
Now, you never really know what someone else is going to take out of it. You know, like you can talk in school or up here for an hour, and you don't really know what somebody's going to say. Oh, that makes me think this, and that helps in some way. And it might be just a casual remark that, you know, you don't realize it's important, but it hits someone a certain way. I mean, I had the advantage of doing the last lecture of this week, so I got to sit there and listen to the other lectures and the other discussions and take notes, you know, because you probably didn't even know what you were saying that was making me write my lecture. You know, it can be just you know, one thing that that someone says, like, oh, I got to write that down. That's important, you know, and you don't know what that'll be. Now with retirement, of course, nobody should feel they have to retire, but no one should feel like I shouldn't retire or I can't retire, or, you know, I'm not good enough to not work. You know, it's like you should be able to do whatever you want. I think when we get to our age. Yes.
This is Susanna, and I just have to share that, as you said about we don't know what people are bringing in when we talk to a group. And my favorite comment when someone was leaving was, they said, "Oh, I loved it when you said," and then they said something I never said.
Right.
But that was what the Lord gave them. So we're just conduits of creating a space where the Lord can do the Lord's work.
I know. That's why when I cited different references and teachers I had, it's really hard for me to think back, what did I actually learn from them? And what did I just think while they were talking? Or I was sitting in class and I thought of something that, it's because we're all doing that differently. We all have different experiences and knowledge, and we're putting things together in our own way. And so yeah, you just take something from this person and from there, and something, you have a thought or a feeling, and you try to make sense of it.
I just wanted to talk about retiring. Oh, I'm Kevin. I'm always horrible with that. We should never retire from trying to live love.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that the material things we do define who we are. And my best example of it was one time when I was sitting in a nursing home talking to someone, 2 patients in a room. One was foul and nasty to every caregiver that walked in, and the other was respectful and nice. So no matter your situation in life, you always can ask yourself the question, what does it mean for me to love the person I come in contact with?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's in a receiving role and not a giving role, and you always have the ability to be of use even in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should never define who we are by what we can physically do, but it's who we can really spiritually be.
Mm-hmm. I know, I think in this society, unfortunately, a lot of times we tend to identify with our job or our profession, what we're getting paid for, and so then if we stop doing that, you're right, you all of a sudden feel, oh, I'm not being useful, when we're useful to each other in community. We're useful to each other as we listen and talk to each other. You're useful when you smile at the cashier and make them have a slightly better day. I mean, there's so many ways of being useful. And my dad, he moved in with us when he was 75, and he said, retirement doesn't mean I don't do anything. It means I can do whatever I want. But he still liked giving sermons at the church and driving my kids around to their classes. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm retired, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit home and read the paper. You know, he had things he wanted to do, but he thought, I don't have to do them. It's not my job. No one's looking over my shoulder and telling me what to do. I can do whatever I want. Yes? Oh.
No, just give me the mic. Held it higher than I should have.
I know we're almost out of time here.
This is Julie, says I didn't tell it last time. One of the interesting things I found since I did retire was actually I'm busier, and I'm actually leading a group of people who have brain damage, as do I, and it's every week now. And I thought, well, I'm not really retiring. It feels so much better to be doing something that I can do. So thank you.
We're going to have a 10-minute break now, and then anyone that would like to continue discussing these 2 lectures or anything that happened this week will come back together at 11 o'clock.